The sea was unusually calm that morning. On December 5th, 1872, the crew of the British ship Dei Gratia was sailing across the Atlantic when Captain David Morehouse noticed something strange on the horizon. A ship was moving slowly through the water, its sails hanging at awkward angles. It was not following a steady course. Instead, it seemed to drift wherever the wind pushed it. At first, Morehouse assumed that the vessel's crew might be struggling with damaged equipment, but as the Dei Gratia moved closer, an uneasy feeling spread among the sailors. No one appeared on deck. There were no voices calling for assistance. No one appeared on deck. There were no voices calling for assistance. No signal flags had been raised. The ship simply moved through the Atlantic like an empty shell. When Morehouse examined it through his telescope, he recognized the name painted on its side, Mary Celeste. He knew the ship. More importantly, he knew its captain. Benjamin Briggs was an experienced and respected sailor. Only a few weeks earlier, the two captains had reportedly crossed paths in New York. Briggs had spoken confidently about his upcoming journey to Italy. There had been no sign that he expected trouble. Yet now his ship was wandering alone in the middle of the ocean. Captain Morehouse ordered his first mate, Oliver Devoe, to take a small boat and investigate. As Devoe and two sailors rowed toward the asterisk Mary Celeste, the silence became more disturbing. The vessel looked almost normal from a distance. Its wooden hull was still intact. Its main mast stood tall against the pale sky. But a ship without movement from its crew was never truly normal. The men climbed aboard. The deck was wet, and several ropes had been left hanging over the sides. Some of the sails were damaged, while others were still raised. One of the ship's hatches was open. The cabin doors moved slightly with the motion of the sea. Devoe called out, "Hello?" His voice traveled through the empty vessel. No one answered. They searched the deck, then moved below. The crew's belongings were still there. Clothing had been left in chests. Personal objects remained inside the sleeping quarters. Captain Briggs's cabin contained papers and possessions that a man would never willingly leave behind. The ship's cargo was also mostly untouched. The Mary Celeste had been carrying more than 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol from New York to Genoa, Italy. The cargo was valuable, yet there were no obvious signs that pirates had stolen anything. Food remained in the storage areas, fresh water was still available. There were enough supplies to last for months. This was not a ship abandoned because its crew had run out of food. It was not a ship destroyed by a violent attack. There was no blood, no bodies, no clear evidence of a struggle. But the people were gone. Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and 7 crewmen had vanished. 10 people in total. The only major object missing was the ship's small lifeboat. The ship's chronometer and sextant were also gone. These were tools that a captain might take if he intended to navigate away from the vessel. A rope appeared to have been tied to the back of the ship, suggesting that the lifeboat may have followed the asterisk Mary Celeste for some time before becoming separated. It looked as if everyone had entered the lifeboat voluntarily. But why? Why would an experienced captain order his family and crew into a small open boat in the middle of the Atlantic, leaving behind a vessel that was still capable of sailing? That question would haunt investigators for generations. Before the disappearance, the journey had seemed ordinary. The Mary Celeste left New York Harbor on November 7, 1872. Captain Briggs was 37 years old and had spent much of his life at sea. He came from a family of sailors and was known as a careful, religious, and responsible man. This was not the kind of captain who panicked easily. His wife, Sarah, was also familiar with life aboard ships. Their young daughter, Sophia, traveled with them, while their older son remained with relatives so that he could attend school. The crew had been chosen carefully. They were experienced sailors, most of them from Germany and Denmark. There were no known criminals among them, no reports of serious arguments, and no reason to believe they had planned a rebellion. For the first part of the voyage, the weather was difficult, but not extraordinary. The ship encountered strong winds and rough seas as it crossed the Atlantic. Then the logbook stopped. The final entry was written on the morning of November 25th. According to the record, the asterisk Mary Celeste was near the island of Santa Maria in the Azores. Nothing in the final message suggested disaster. There was no desperate warning, no mention of fire, no report of illness or attack. After that entry, there was only silence. When the ship was discovered 10 days later, it had traveled hundreds of miles without anyone aboard. The Dei Gratia crew managed to sail the abandoned vessel to Gibraltar, where an official investigation began. Instead of solving the mystery, however, the investigation made it even stranger. Frederick Solly Flood, the British official responsible for examining the case, quickly became suspicious. He believed that something criminal had happened aboard the ship. Perhaps the crew had become drunk from the cargo and murdered Captain Briggs. Perhaps Captain Morehouse and the men of the asterisk Dei Gratia had attacked the asterisk Mary Celeste, killed everyone, and then pretended to discover the ship so they could claim the salvage money. Perhaps Captain Briggs himself had been involved in an insurance fraud plan. But the evidence did not support these theories. The alcohol was not intended for drinking, and the barrels were tightly sealed. There was no proof that anyone had broken into them. Morehouse and Briggs may have known each other, but there was no convincing reason for Morehouse to murder an entire family and crew. The ship was worth money, but not enough to justify such a complicated and dangerous crime. Investigators studied several marks on the vessel, believing that they might be bloodstains or signs of violence. Later examinations suggested they were natural stains, rust, or damage caused by the sea. No weapon was found. No secret message was discovered. No confession ever appeared. Slowly, the theory of murder began to collapse. Then came the stories. Newspapers around the world transformed the mystery into something darker. Some reports claimed that warm meals were still sitting on the table when the ship was found, as though the crew had disappeared in the middle of breakfast. Others said that cups of tea remained warm. Some claimed that a half-eaten meal had been discovered beside a child's toy. These details were dramatic, but most were not true. The real Mary Celeste was mysterious enough without them. Over time, people began inventing explanations. A giant sea monster had pulled the crew into the water. A mysterious whirlpool had swallowed them. Pirates had attacked and removed every body without stealing the cargo. The crew had witnessed something supernatural and abandoned the ship in terror. Some even suggested that the asterisk Mary Celeste had entered a strange area of the ocean where time and reality behaved differently. But the most convincing explanation may have been much more human. 9 of the alcohol barrels were later found empty. They had been made from a type of wood that was more likely to leak than the other barrels. If alcohol vapor had escaped into the cargo hold, Captain Briggs might have feared an explosion. Imagine the situation. You are below deck when you smell something sharp and unfamiliar. You hear a deep sound from the cargo area, perhaps the movement of barrels or pressure inside the hold. You know that your ship is carrying a large quantity of flammable alcohol. Your wife and 2-year-old daughter are aboard. You open the hatch but cannot see clearly inside. Perhaps the equipment used to measure the cargo is giving an unreliable reading. Perhaps water has entered the ship, making you believe that it is sinking. Then you hear a small explosion. Not enough to destroy the vessel, but enough to frighten everyone. Captain Briggs may have ordered the crew into the lifeboat as a temporary precaution. He may not have intended to abandon the asterisk Mary Celeste completely. The lifeboat could have been tied to the ship with a long rope so that everyone could return once the danger passed. Then the weather changed. A strong wind filled the sails. The Mary Celeste suddenly moved forward. The rope snapped. And in a matter of seconds, the ship disappeared into the distance. The people in the lifeboat would have watched helplessly as their only shelter sailed away. They had little food, limited water, and no protection from the open Atlantic. The ocean did not need a monster. It only needed time. A wave may have overturned the boat. A storm may have carried it far from any shipping route. The passengers may have died from exposure, thirst, or exhaustion. Their bodies were never found. The lifeboat was never recovered. And so, even the most reasonable theory remains only a theory. There are other possibilities. The ship had taken on water, and one of its pumps may have been damaged. Captain Briggs might have believed that the vessel was sinking faster than it actually was. The ship was also off course, possibly because its navigation instruments were inaccurate. From his point of view, leaving the ship may have seemed like the safest choice. That is the cruelest part of the story. The decision that killed them may have been made to save their lives. The Mary Celeste did not sink after the disappearance. It continued sailing for years under different owners, but its reputation followed it everywhere. Sailors whispered that the vessel was cursed. The ship changed hands several times and was involved in accidents and financial problems. In 1885, its final owner deliberately crashed it near Haiti while attempting to commit insurance fraud. The plan failed. The once famous ghost ship was left to decay beneath the Caribbean waters. Yet the wreck did not end the mystery. More than a century later, people still ask the same questions. What did Captain Briggs see or hear that made him leave his ship? Did the crew panic? Was there an explosion? Did a sudden storm tear the lifeboat away? Or did something happen aboard the asterisk Mary Celeste that history has completely forgotten? We may never know. The Atlantic kept no written record. The waves erased the final moments, and the people who knew the truth disappeared with their small boat. That is why the story remains so powerful. The Mary Celeste was not found broken apart. It was not burned. It was not covered in blood. It was simply empty. Every rope, every open door, and every abandoned personal object seemed to suggest that life had been there only moments before. A child had once walked across those wooden floors. A mother had arranged her belongings inside the cabin. Sailors had laughed, complained, worked, and watched the horizon. Then, somehow, all of them were gone. The ship survived. The people did not, and for 10 silent days, the asterisk Mary Celeste crossed the Atlantic alone, carrying its untouched cargo and its unanswered secret through the dark water. Not a haunted ship, not necessarily a cursed ship, just an empty vessel moving beneath an endless sky, while somewhere behind it, lost in the ocean, 10 human lives vanished without leaving a final word.